Race and racism are probably two of the most misused and misunderstood words in our language. So often they are used and identified with color, skin pigmentation, or physical characteristics like the shape of the head, the shape, the length of the legs, and various physiological considerations. But just how much difference is there between the Serbian people and the Croatian people? Now, there's no other word for the war that's going on between these people than a racial war, because they identify themselves as a different ethnic people. Ethnic is another word. We tend to back off of race these days and speak more in terms of ethnicity. But the Serbs are one ethnic group. The Croatians are another ethnic group. Now, if you had them all lined up or mixed up in a room, do you think you'd have a chance of going through and saying, that's a Serb, and that's a Croat, and so on and so on? You have a chance? No. Of course not. As far as we're concerned, and probably as far as most of them are concerned, as far as their color, their physical characteristics, no one would ever tell the difference. Is there any significant difference in your mind between Ukrainians and Moldavians? Would you be able to tell the difference? Moldavia, I understand, a little tiny country, is now about to split into 3 countries, once again because of ethnic differences between their people. There are 3 different kinds of people there, 3 different races, if you will, of people who don't like one another, don't trust one another, and they're all going to declare their independence and go their separate ways. I don't know if I could tell you the difference between a Russian and a Ukrainian, between a Kenyan and a Ugandan in Africa. I don't think I could necessarily point out the difference between someone from Nigeria and someone from Ghana. And in many cases, I would never be able to tell the difference between a German and a Jew. And yet they consider themselves very different races of people. And the Germans, using the concept of race, and in something that could only be called racism, call themselves a master race and set out to destroy all manner of inferior people, of whom the Jews simply were the most numerous. The ethnic fracture lines in Eastern Europe now, I think, are going to leave all of us in total confusion in the years to come. How long it will be before someone once again steps in and tries to reunify all of Eastern Europe under force of arms is anybody's guess. But those people identify themselves by their race or by their ethnic group as being different from the one right across the street or across the line, a line that may be no more meaningful than the lines on the floor that we have in this room. But those people over there are different from those of us who are over here. Racism, when we use the word, may actually mask a more fundamental tendency of human nature. It finds expression in nationalism or territorialism. In other words, we are Germans, and you are French, and you are different from us. And it isn't merely, you could walk back and forth across the French border and look at people in Germany and France, and you couldn't tell where you were by looking at the people. And yet, somehow or other, you are French, we are German, and there is a fundamental division between the two. There is, of course, also this same tendency is expressed not only in nationalism or territorialism, it's expressed in religion. As people along lines of doctrine or belief or codes that they express to one another or creeds that they pronounce or profess have gone to war with other people over religion. It comes out in family feuds like the Hatfields and the McCoys in this country, or like the Capulets and the Montagues of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. You can see in any of these situations, from a local church to a great church organization to a family to a feud between families to young people who marry across the boundaries of two families contrary to the wishes of their families. You can see in a microcosm or you can see it in macrocosm throughout the whole world the forces that are at work in this area. And as a matter of fact, it's not merely a matter between black and white. If you find it also in the areas between black, between white and Hispanic, but it goes long beyond that. For even the Hispanic people have not been able to avoid racism among themselves as they divide up along the lines of turf. And you wear colors, color scheme of clothing, as you walk in your area of your turf. And if you cross over into the territory of someone wearing another set of colors, You actually take your life in your hand. Racism is but one manifestation of a universal expression of human nature. Now let's consider today how it all started. First, I am going to do today strictly a biblical look at the subject of race. There are more extra-biblical theories concerning racial origins and race and the difference between humans than we could ever imagine to talk about. I'm going to approach this today strictly from a biblical point of view. What does the Bible tell us? The reason I want to do this is because so many people who adopt a racist posture or a racist position on issues point to the Bible for their justification for how they feel about it. Now, that being the case, I think it would be a good idea for us to understand what the Bible says about racial origins and about the origins of the tendency in human beings to engage in what, for want of a better word right now, we'll call racism. I want you to turn back with me to the second chapter of Genesis. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 21. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs, and he closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib, which the Lord God had taken from man, made he a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam says, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. We are presented here with a man, presumably a man with certain, what shall we say, ethnic characteristics. Was he white? Was he red? Was he black? Was he yellow? What color was Adam? His name means red. But I don't know how much that means. I think it has to do with the fact that he was simply taken from and made out of red earth. But we know practically nothing about his race. In one sense of the word, it's not terribly relevant. We do know, of course, that woman was taken out of man and formed from his rib, and presumably she would have been of the same, here's the word again, race as Adam. But there's a problem that we find as we study through this. As you go on to the third chapter of Genesis, down to verse 20, it says, Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. Now, what does that mean? Well, essentially it tells us that from two human beings, from one man and from one woman, every human being who has ever lived has come. This is the biblical model that people are going to have to go back to and explain and understand. So all other theories apart, the Bible presents us with a woman in whom was the genetic possibility of all the races that we see in the world today. Now, I could advance a theory, make a suggestion as to what I thought that was, how I thought that was done. There's one that advanced that the woman, when she is born, has all the eggs that she will ever have in all of her life in her ovaries, and that therefore God could have set that up that way. Possibly he did. Possibly he set it up so that in her genetic code there was a possibility of mutation. None of that really matters very much. What does matter is that in this one woman was the possibility for all the races that have ever existed since man began. Now, there is a theory that Adam and Eve were white, and that black people came about as a result of the mark that God placed upon Cain. Have any of you ever heard, how many of you have heard that theory at one time? Aha, so we're not dealing with something from left field, are we? Cain's mark was, according to this theory, that Cain was turned black, and that all the black people down through time have come about as a result of that. Now, if you'll just turn back to the fourth chapter of Genesis, I'd like for us to examine this for a moment. Apart from the fact that there is no support for this idea at all. Now, that in itself is a fairly significant element, isn't it? There is absolutely no support for the fact that the mark of Cain was that Cain was turned black. But let's not quibble. Let's place that over here for a moment. Apart from the fact that it does not account for the origin of the Asian people, but that is a problem, isn't it? Well, we have that, but let's take that and let's put that over here on the shelf for the moment. Apart from these things, what does the Bible say about Cain? Genesis, the fourth chapter, beginning in verse 1. And Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have begotten a man from the Lord. He was the first son, not the second, the first son, the firstborn of Adam and Eve. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a tiller of the ground. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering to the Lord. That's, of course, what he was producing, and logically he would have expected to have brought that. Abel also brought the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and his offering, but to Cain and his offering he had not respect. And Cain was angry, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said to Cain, well, why are you mad? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, shall you not be accepted? And if you do not well, sin lies at the door. Now this next expression, under you shall be his desire, and you shall rule over it, is awkwardly phrased, and the Hebrew doesn't translate well into English, but in the modern vernacular it simply means sin lies at the door, but you can get over it. You can overcome it. Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass that when they were in the field, Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and he killed him. Now, first of all, the fact that God did not have respect to Cain and his offering had nothing to do with the fact he didn't like Cain. Remember, he comes along and says, if you do well, won't you be accepted? All right? So it had to do with what Cain did. And there's no way that God could have held Cain accountable for something that he did not know. So we can safely assume Cain knew what he should have done, and Cain did not do it. And then having been not accepted by God, he was mad. And the Lord said to Cain after he had killed his brother, where is Abel your brother? He said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. And now are you cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. All right? Cain was cursed. What was the curse? Read. When you till the ground, it shall not henceforth yield to you her strength. You are cursed from the ground because you spilled your brother's blood on the ground, so you're going to plow and sow, and the land is not going to yield to you. As a result of that, you're going to be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. You have just read Cain's curse. What is it? The earth will not yield for you, and you're going to be a fugitive. Cain said, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Wow. What did he see his punishment at? Well, what God had just said. Where's the mark? Hasn't been mentioned, has it? The mark is not a part of the curse. It isn't even mentioned in connection with the curse. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from your face shall I be hid. In other words, Cain himself was cast out of God's presence. And I think it's important for us to realize this, that as Cain went out from God, he was out of God's presence and away from God for the rest of his life. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that anybody that finds me is going to kill me. Now, he added this other item on here as a matter of his concern of the result of the punishment that God had placed upon him. And the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. The mark of Cain was not a curse. It was a mark of protection. It was a mark to warn anyone that comes along that they should not hurt this man, that they should not harm this man. His punishment was that the ground upon which he had spilled his brother's blood would not yield to him, and he would be a fugitive and a vagabond. His punishment was not that he would be killed. His punishment was not that he would be black. The mark that God put upon him, whatever it was, and we have no way of believing that it was he was made black, God set a mark on him. He didn't change his color or dye him. The mark was simply for the purpose of his protection. It was not a curse. Now, if you were going to follow logically the argument that God turned him black as the mark, then anyone who killed a black man or a black child or a black person will come under the curse of God. For that mark was put upon him, lest anyone should attempt to punish Cain beyond what God had punished him. As always, there is a complete failure in the logic of some of the ideas people put forward. If you're going to hold this view that the mark of Cain was that Cain was turned black, and that therefore all of his progenitors had the mark of Cain upon it, then you are specifically prohibited from ever harming a black person. And God promises that he will wreak vengeance upon you if you do. But of course, that's all nonsense, because the mark of Cain had nothing whatever to do with that. There is another pernicious theory that suggests that Eve had a child by the serpent. Now, there isn't a thing in the world in the Bible that says that. There's no suggestion of it. You can search the book of Genesis one end or the other. You can read through here with a magnifying glass. You can read every word aloud carefully. You can read it backwards, front way, sideways, take your pick. And there's not a suggestion anywhere in that anything like that took place. The idea is that there was some offspring from this serpent then, and Eve, that the head was cursed. And I think some people believe that that was the black race as time goes on. It is a whole cloth fabrication. And you should ask yourself, why would people read the Bible and invent complete theories of the origin of race out of the Bible? And I can say they are invented. Why would they do a thing like that? There is a reason for it, and we'll come back to it in a moment. But there is the biggest fallacy of this, and one that would be missed. You should catch it if you have read all the rest of the way through Genesis. Do you know what it is? All of Cain's descendants died in the flood. All of them. Wiped out. Any other seed that might have been conceived by Eve and the serpent died in the flood. Everybody died in the flood except for 8 people, right? Who were those 8 people? Noah, Noah's wife, Noah's 3 sons, and Noah's 3 daughters-in-law. Only 8 people survived the flood. All races in the Bible from that time, all the races of man, all manner of human beings on the face of this earth are descended from these 8. Everyone else, Cain's descendants, the serpent seed, all of them perished in the flood. This was, in fact, the point of the flood, was to clear up all of the garbage that had accumulated in the world, to get rid of the violence and the violent people in the world, and to save 8 people with which God would start all this stuff over again. Now, if you'll turn back to Genesis 6, we'll understand the profound truth. Every theory of the origin of race, every idea of the origin of race, every explanation of the existence of race must pass through the ark, with Noah and his wife, his 3 sons, and his 3 daughters-in-law. There is no other route whereby this can be explained. And you see, God allowed, and it was his will, for every one of those people who were on the ark to be on the ark. And it was his will that they be on the ark in the relationship they were in, or they would not have been there at all. Genesis 6, verse 1. It came to pass when men began to multiply upon the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all that they chose. Now, again, there are more theories about the origins of man and the things in early chapters of Genesis than we could ever account for. The idea is that, well, these sons of God must have been angels, and they married women, and they had these giant men of renown in ancient times. Wrong. Angels do not marry women. Angels do not cohabit with women. There is no indication in the Bible where that ever happened. And the idea that these sons of God have to be angels is idiotic on the face of it. The Bible very plainly identifies human beings as sons of God. In the New Testament, we are called sons of God. When they got after Jesus because he said himself was a son of God, he said, haven't you read in your own Psalms, I said, you are God? The idea that these, quote, sons of God marrying the daughters of the children of men were somehow angels is ludicrous on the face of it. Now, there may well be the fact that because of the fact that Cain and his descendants were away from God, that they were not referred to as sons of God. It may well be that in the process of time, those few people really alive on the face of the earth who retained a relationship with God were called sons of God, as you and I are called sons of God. And that the sons of God looked out among the children of men and saw the daughters of the children of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all that they chose. The suggestion is, by one theory of race, that this was totally wrong. It's one of the reasons why God became angry with these people, was they were taking wives of all that they chose. But there is a Gilbert and Sullivan quality almost to some of this stuff, of almost a ridiculous, in the sense that there's a complete failure on our part many times when we look back at the world of this time to realize that men started out marrying their own sisters. There was no one else to marry. And when they weren't marrying sisters, they were marrying nieces, or maybe they were marrying the niece of one of their nephews, somebody in that nature. Everybody was related to everybody back in that time. There was no other way. People say, where did Cain get his wife? Well, Cain married either his sister or his niece, or maybe the daughter of one of his nephews. However, I don't know how you get off the great nieces and how you would define all that. But you see, these people lived a long time. And there's no suggestion in the Bible that Cain got married for 100 years. And in 100 years, there were a lot of people out here on the earth. And who knows what movements and migrations had taken place. But when they started out, they were marrying sisters and cousins, close cousins, nieces, nephews, people to whom they were related, people of their own family, people of their own clan. So to suggest that there was something wrong with men taking wives of all that they might choose was a little bit ludicrous, because these people were all related to one another. I mean, clans and clans of people, and knowing who. Now, if there was a distinction made, the problem was a religious distinction, not a racial distinction, in that the sons of God, for want of a better expression, let's call them people who were God worshippers, were marrying people who were not God worshippers, who had been driven out from the presence of God. Now, that perhaps could be in there somewhere. And in fact, that would join completely with Abraham's concern about who his son Isaac was going to marry. His concern, as he sent his servant to go find a wife of his own people, was that his son would not marry people of the Canaanite religion. It was a religious concern, not a racial concern, whatever that we might mean by that expression of race. Back in Genesis 6 again now. God said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, because he is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years." We understand that to mean that this is the point in time where God said, I've had it with these people. There's going to be 120 years left, and it's all going to be over. This was said 120 years before the great flood. There were Nephilim in the earth in those days. Giant may not be the correct translation of that word. The Hebrew word is not used very often in the Old Testament at all. And it comes from a root which means to fall or fallen. And again, we have this possible distinction between the sons of God on the one hand and those who had been driven out from the presence of God, the fallen, on the other hand. This is a possible meaning of this, that these people were the people who were away from God. Another translation says there were tyrants on the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of the men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men of old, men of renown. Now notice the implication is taken by many people that the giants were the result of the sons of God marrying women. Actually, it says there were Nephilim or giants in those days, and after that, when the sons of God were marrying these other people, these men of renown came on the scene. So there is no real connection made in the book of Genesis between this particular kind of intermarriage and the existence of giants. In fact, I would suspect that if there was giantism and this type of problem taking place back then, it was because people were marrying too close, not because they were marrying too far. The fact is that up until the time of Noah, it was almost impossible to marry too far because of because of the fact that everybody was marrying sisters, cousins, and relatives in those early years. But of course, all of that is speculation, isn't it? All of it is speculation. The only thing we know about it is what we read right here. He continues, God saw the wickedness of man, that it was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Notice, what is it that God's angry with man about? Because he is marrying too far away from himself genetically? No. It's because his imagination has gone totally over into evil. It repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. It's hard for you and I to quite get that around, minds around that, but it means what it says. God was sorry he did it. It grieved him. And the Lord said, I'm going to destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. I'm sorry I did it. Man and beast, creeping thing, fowls of the air, for it repents me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. You know, the word grace is important here. Not even Noah deserved to survive. Noah survived because of God's grace. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Now, this has been interpreted to mean that because of the fact that Noah was genetically perfect, whatever that might mean in a time when people were marrying their own cousins and sisters and nieces and nephews, mind you. And Noah was not a young man by the time this all came to pass. So he had been around for quite a while through this whole period of time. He was perfect in his generations. The idea is that he had not married people of another race. And, of course, that's assuming that there was such a thing as another race by this time. Remember, everybody is related to everybody else. But anyway, that's not what it means. The Revised Standard Version says Noah was a just man in his generation. The New American Standard Bible says Noah was blameless in his time. What it's talking about is not that the man was somehow genetically uncorrupted. It simply means that he was a man who in his generation lived a holy and a righteous and a just life. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me. Why? For the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I'm going to destroy them with the earth. Why did God destroy the earth? Because they had been racially intermarrying, as has been suggested? No. Because the earth was filled with violence. In fact, it's even questionable to what extent the earth was even much racially differentiated prior to this time. Because the fact is, as I said, people started out marrying their sisters, and after that they were marrying nieces and nephews, and they were marrying cousins and people they were related to. And everybody was related to everybody else. The problem was not marrying too far away. The problem was marrying too close. But then came the flood. The theory is that the flood came because of racial intermarriage. That Noah was racially pure, and therefore Noah was saved. You know what the problem is? There's a neat little problem in this. A fun little logical problem. How do you account for the existence of 3 major lines or races of people after the flood? If this is the causative relationship, if this is the cause-effect, the flood came because of racial intermarriage. Noah was not an example of that. He was racially pure, therefore Noah was saved. How did we get the other races through the flood? The fact is the flood came upon the earth because it was filled with violence. Fact, there were 2 interracial marriages on the ark. There had to be. There's no other way to account for the passage through the flood of 3 different racial strains. You could argue, if you wished, if you must, that Noah was white and his wife was white, and Ham and Japheth were all white. They were his sons. He was racially pure. And maybe Shem's wife was white as well, because he seems to have been the father of a long race of what we call Semitic peoples, or the European peoples, or the white people of the earth. But the wife of Japheth must have been Asian, at least what we today would call Asian. And the wife of Ham must have been black. It's the only way you can account for these racial divisions that exist after the flood, unless you conclude, well, they were all white on the ark, and that somehow or other God caused these changes to take place after the flood. Well, you know, there's no accounting for what theories people will advance. You ought to at least, however, have something to base it on, and there is absolutely nothing upon which to base that. The fact is, you had two people on that ark who were not white. One who was yellow, one who was black, and again, I'm speaking in general terms here. No one is truly yellow, and no one is truly black. God then was willing. That's in fact, we can conclude this. God was willing to preserve three races, right? He was willing. It was God's will that on the other side of the flood, there should be not one, but three races. He could have, since he had grace toward Noah, he could have had grace toward a black couple. He could have had grace toward a yellow couple. And he could have put these sets of different couples on the ark. It could have been Noah and his wife, Shem and his wife, and a black couple and a yellow couple. Couldn't he have done it that way? After all, he had two gazelles, he had two deer, he had two dogs. I don't know how many breeds of dogs he had, but probably only two, from which we got the rest of them. And he had different kinds of sets of animals on this ark, right? Why not a black couple? Why not a yellow couple? Could have done it, could have had grace upon them. But he didn't. The sons of Noah were obviously all of Noah's race, unless Noah had had them by other wives. But then Noah had them by other wives. Noah wasn't genetically perfect, was he? He'd been fooling around. God was willing to preserve three races through the flood by interracial marriage. And that's something that's a little difficult for some people to get their mind around. But the fact is, if you're going to just simply read the Bible, that's all you're left with. Now then, subsequent to the time of the flood, as man began to develop on the face of the earth, some very interesting things took place. One of those that often contributes to the ideas of racial discrimination is found over in the 9th chapter of Genesis. Genesis chapter 9. It says in verse 18, the sons of Noah that went forth in the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. We've got to account from these three men, the whole earth. Now, all these three men were the same genetically. They all came, as far as we know, from the same father and mother. Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and got himself stone drunk, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers without. We feel reasonably sure there is something in the event here that is simply not included in this. There's much more to it than meets the eye. We won't worry about that today. We'll just worry about it look at it today strictly from the standpoint of what we understand about race. He saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon their shoulders, and went backward. They weren't willing to see their father naked. They went backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they didn't see him. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what and the expression younger son probably means youngest son, and it likely means grandson. It probably reaches all the way down to Canaan, as you'll see from what it says. Saw what his youngest son had done to him. He said, "Cursed be Canaan." This is why we conclude it probably means grandson. "A servant of servants shall he be to his brethren." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem. Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in tents, the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant." And here we have a curse that is pronounced upon Canaan. Of this, there is no argument. The idea that is often advanced, though, from the racial point of view, is that then for all generations and for all time, the descendants of Canaan were to be servants of Shem and Japheth, that they were to be a serving class or a slave class of people. Now, does it occur to you that there might be something wrong with that? if you think there might be, turn along with me to Exodus, the 20th chapter, and I'll show you what it is that's wrong with it. Exodus chapter 20. We're in the Ten Commandments. Verse 4. You shall not make unto you any graven image or any likeness of anything that's in heaven above, or that's in earth beneath, or that's in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down yourself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. How many generations? Third and fourth. Generations of who? Of them that hate me. There is a limit, a statute of limitations, if you will, on the wrath of God and upon a curse of God. You cannot justify the purchase and sale of black children in the 18th century because Canaan saw his father or grandfather in the nude. They won't reach that far. Why do you think that people do things like that? Why do they come up with these harebrained theories of race and race origins and curses and try to make them last down through all generations? The reason is simple. Is to justify ourselves for our hatred and for the evil that we have done to other people. You can see Christian, Bible-thumping people back in the 18th century who owned other human beings, trying to find in the Bible some kind of justification for what they did. And can't you understand how the curse that was placed on Canaan, that's it. And they see everything in the light of the way they live their lives and the way they treat the people in which they come into contact. Now, I've talked up until this point of it as though it were racism and as though it had to do with race, although I suggested to you early on in my message that we probably are misunderstanding what's going on, that there is something deeper involved, and there is. It's what I'll call today, for want of a better term, the clan paradox. And by clan, I mean clan like a Scottish clan or a clan being a family. The clan paradox. It is in human nature to form ourselves into clans. We actually see, of course, our family as a clan, and we react to it in that nation. But we go far beyond the question of mere family and clans. We create ethnic clans, we create religious clans, we create cultural clans, we create clans around the idea of privilege. We define our clans and how we are different from other people. In Scotland, because they all look alike, and you certainly would have a hard time telling a Highland Scot from a Lowland Scot, they wore tartans. Something like the Latin kids will wear colors in the barrios and their turf to mark off where they are and to identify what clan they belong to. Well, the old Scottish warlords did the same thing. You wear a Stuart tartan. My tartan is a Macmillan tartan because that's my family. My Scottish clan is Macmillan. Others were Stuart, McNabb. The clans go on, and you can find walls full of tartans. And this, Scotland is a little country. There aren't just a whole bunch of people up there. Back in the old days, there weren't. But every single clan, and the clans divided out into septs. And the people inside that clan. And they would fight with one another, and the clans would fight with one another. And the only a rare occasion, it only took to get all the clans together in Scotland to fight the English. That would get them together. But when they didn't have to fight the English, they much preferred to fight one another. We don't have tartans in religions, but we have things like doctrines and creeds. We have different kinds of gods and liturgies that identify one religion from another, and we create clans. And the fact is that even within certain clans of religions, there are sects. They call them sects in religion, S-E-C-T-S instead of S-E-P-T-S, so that we can have all of the variety of clans, cliques, groups that we might ever want. We can define them by religion. We can define them hundreds of ways. We can define our clans by territory or by turf. We can define them by social class, which is one manifestation of that takes place even in high school. The kids learn early about all this, and they form cliques. And so you have your clique here and a clique there and a clique there, and you might belong to this club and that club, and the clubs are different from one another, and the clubs socialize with one another, and clubs have standing, and clubs have status. We expect clan loyalty, as a matter of fact. And depending upon the kind of clan it is, we expect people to marry within the clan. And there's something very strange about it when people marry outside the clan. Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is a classic old story of a young man and a young woman who fell in love. There was no racial problem between them by how we would define it, but there was an enormous clan problem between their families who hated one another and had hated one another for generations. They came to love one another, and they broke the code of their clan. The story is one that's fascinating and one of the great pieces of literature. The clan paradox is a paradox because we also have, in addition to this desire to be a part of a group. Now, this is what I would call the clan instinct is to be a part of a group, to be loyal to the group, and to expect and demand loyalty of other members of the group. But it's a paradox because we also have a drive to unify. Now, if you'll just page back into Genesis again to chapter 11, I want to show you the archetype of this drive to unify and how God responded to it. Genesis, the 11th chapter. The whole earth, this is after the flood now, mind you, quite a little while after the flood, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Now, you know, we're all one big happy clan. You see, we have one language, one speech. And they said one to another, now let's get busy and make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime for mortar. And they said, let's build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Actually, let's make a tower unto the heavens is what it should read. So they didn't have any idea they were going to reach into the heavens with it. Let us make us a name. Now, what was their purpose in all this? Let's make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. In other words, we're concerned that we would begin to break up into clans. And this group of people would go there, and we'll lose touch with them. And this group will go there, and we'll lose touch with them. Let's build us a tower to the heavens. I think it was probably an astronomical observatory is what it was for. Let's make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. It was a major unifying effort. They wanted to have a center for all mankind. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing shall be withheld from them or restrained from them which they have imagined to do. What was God's concern with the Tower of Babel? Power. God, and you'll see this in different places in the Bible, as a matter of fact. There is a definite concern for God for man having too much centralization of power. You remember when the children of Israel first asked God for a king? And God says, wait a minute, I didn't want you to have a king. I never tried to put a king over you. In fact, during most of their existence, God allowed them to be clans. There was a clan here, you know, Israel, the tribe of Joseph was here, Ephraim was there, Manasseh was here, Reuben was there. They all had their land divided for them by lot. The only time they got together was on the annual holy days, and by and large, they were left alone. Every man dwelt under his own vine, his own fig tree. There were a system of judges if they had to have them, but mostly they were expected to work out their own problems. The system, he is governed best, who is governed least. And along here comes God and says, what I see happening here is a massive centralization of power. Israel wanted a massive centralization of power so they could deal with their enemies more effectively. They wanted a king. These people wanted a centralization of power. God was concerned about it. He says, go to, let us go down and there confound their language, so they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, and they left off building this city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. Now, it's a fascinating story when you begin to look at the dynamics. What happened? They were trying to unify. What did God do? God came down and divided them. Not the sort of thing that you would just immediately have expected God to do. What was happening? Man was in the process of building an empire. What happened in the Soviet Union years ago was they put together an empire. And they forced the unity of the Moldavians. They forced the unity of the Lithuanians. They forced all the Balkan republics and all these different republics to become a part of the Soviet Union. Now that the Soviet Union is coming apart, all these ethnic differences are cropping up again. They were trying in Genesis 11 to build an empire. What do we learn about God's will from this? That God is the author of clans. Of course he is. He came down and divided their languages. How do you imagine that he divided their language? Pray tell. If you read biblical history and you see the way people migrated and what they did, he divided their language along the lines of their tribe, along the lines of their clan. And he created a language barrier between clan and clan. And the effect of it was to prevent a concentration of power which would have done great harm in the world. God doesn't like human concentrations of power. Now, consider one more thing. God created human nature. We all agree with that? God made man. God made us the way we are. God created human nature. Human nature is clannish. We'll find any way we can to express that clannishness, right? Human nature is clannish. What you may not understand about this is that God does not condemn clannishness. He does not condemn loyalty to your clan. Take the example of marriage, for example. Nowhere in the Bible does God legislate against marrying across clan lines. It doesn't tell anybody they can't do it. Those who do it, though, should know that they are swimming against the current. An Ephraimitish girl who married a Reubenite man was swimming against the current. She was going to have trouble with her brothers. She's going to have trouble probably out of her dad. There were likely to be all sorts of difficulties, and it was going to be different when she got over in the Reuben and started living there. But they had to know that when they started out. There is no law against it, but it does run contrary to human social nature, the way that we tend to relate to one another. People who marry across those clan lines have gone contrary to the social nature of man, and man, not God, man, will make them feel it. Won't he? You just better believe it. Of course, this is the reason why in our systematic theology project concerning race, we say that we discourage interracial marriage. Because of sociological reasons. Because the people who do it are swimming upstream. Because they're asking for a lot of difficulty. Inter-clan marriage, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how frustrating, no matter how painful, is a marriage in the sight of God. Now the church completes the clan paradox in that it creates a new clan that cuts across all other clans. You're familiar with these scriptures, but turn back to them anyway. Galatians, the 3rd chapter. Galatians chapter 3, assuming I can get there. My little things on the page that help me find my way to them are wearing off. Galatians chapter 3. And beginning in verse 26. For you are all children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. As many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed. In other words, you are a part of Abraham's clan. I don't care what color your face is. I don't care what the texture of your hair is. I don't care about your national origin, your sex, your gender, anything else. If you are in Christ, you are Abraham's seed. You're in the clan. Now he also says back in Colossians something very similar. Colossians chapter 3. Again, I'm not sure if I'm exactly the same verse or not. Well, I think I missed my verse on this one. I failed to write it down properly in my notes. But once again, the same thing is said essentially, that we are all one in Christ and that there is no distinction to be made to us. They're based upon our national origin, our race, or anything of the kind. Yet, even inside the church, there are clans. Within the clan, septs, if you will. And there are people who kind of look around at one another within these and draw the distinctions like most clans do, saying, well, one of the ways we know who we are is we know we're not like them. There are, for example, within what we consider to be the church, there's us, there's the Worldwide Church of God, Church of God Seventh-day, Seventh-day Adventist Church, Seventh-day Baptist Church, all sorts of church groups of that sort. The fact is that ecumenical movements, you know, where you say, well, let's all get together. Let's have a big convention of all the Sabbath-keeping churches, and let's see if we can't iron out our differences, and let's see if we can't put them all together. You know, this is a bad comparison in a way, but I can't help it. The Tower of Babel comes to mind. Let's see if we can't get all the Sabbath-keeping churches in the world together. Why? What for? What's the point? Because all we're doing is fighting against one of the things that God put inside of us. That the truth is that oftentimes the fact that we can't get along with one another, the fact that we actually can't work well together, we kind of split up and go in different ways, creates a smaller, much more manageable nucleus, and therefore we are able to reach out to other people and reach into other people's lives. And the clan can go, even while the septs bicker sometimes with one another. The fact is, there is no need for ecumenical movements in the church, and I'll tell you something else. Short of the return of Christ, it'll fail. It just won't work. You try it, have fun, but you see, it is in human nature to divide, not to unify. It's hard enough for us. This bunch right here, it's hard enough for us to stay together without trying to pull in another group that's somewhat different from us. Now, there's another thing I want to talk about just briefly before I close today, and that's the mythology of clans. I asked earlier about these myths that the origin of the black people was the mark that God put on Cain, or some idea that Satan had sex with Eve, and therefore a race of people came out of that, or somehow or other this other myth that the curse upon Canaan justifies making slaves out of black people in the 18th century. Where do these myths come from? Like I said, they come to justify the evil that we have done to our fellow man. Now, just how much mythology do you suppose has been created by religious people to justify what they do to other religious people? What sort of mythology do you think exists in the minds of many people in the Worldwide Church of God concerning the people in the Church of God International? What sort of myths have existed in time gone by about the Worldwide Church of God by people who had never darkened the door of the church and didn't know what they believed at all? There was a myth going around Gladewater at one time that at the Feast of Tabernacles up at Big Sandy, they sacrificed lambs up there around it. They actually had seen the concrete gutters where the blood flowed down, somebody said. Of course, all they were simple rain gutters. But it's the myth that someone had created to justify their anger or to justify what they had done or to justify some attitude toward these people. How far do you suppose that we have gone in creating myths about people that we don't like, about people who are not in our clan, people who don't think like we do, or dress like we do, or act like we do, or think like we do? How far do you suppose you would go, or could go, in creating a myth, or believing a myth, because you wanted to believe the myth when your heart and your mind told you it really wasn't true? The singular evil of clannishness is not loyalty to the clan. It's not being loyal to your own people, not just being loyal to your own family. It's not being loyal to your own church. The singular evil of clannishness is exclusivism. It's the fact that we hurt other people, that we demonize other people, that we create mythologies about other people, that we lie about other people, that we believe lies about other people. These are the singular evils of clannishness. And one of the great evils of the whole thing is that we judge other people unworthy of salvation. In Romans, the 14th chapter, there is this very powerful statement by the Apostle Paul. I'll give you this in conclusion. Paul says to the Romans in chapter 14, "Him that is weak in the faith, receive, but not to doubtful disputation. One man believes he can eat anything, another who is weak eats herbs." It'd be so easy to have clans in the church or sects in the church where we have one group that eats meat and the other group that's vegetarian. And so let's just split up from one another. We'll have a vegetarian Church of God and we'll have a carnivorous Church of God on the other side of the street. He said, don't do that. Let not him that eats despise him that eats not, and let not him that eats not judge him that eats. God has received him. Who are you that judges another man's servant? And the truth is that all this creation of myths about other people, and building up stories about other people, and wanting to believe bad things about other people, is part and parcel with this old clannishness that is so deeply ingrained in man. Verse 7, "For none of us lives to himself, and no man dies to himself. For whether we live or whether we die, we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we're the Lord's. To this end Christ died and rose and revived, that he might be Lord of the dead and of the living. But why do you judge your brother? Why do you set at naught your brother? Why do you create this myth that makes your brother sound like he is less somehow than you are, or less than worthy of God's kingdom? Why do you put people down?" That's what setting at naught means. For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. We're all going to be right up there. We might as well, I suppose, for all intents and purposes, be there naked. No clothes, no jewelry, no badges, no emblems, no nothing. All of it. Nobody's exempt. I'm going to be there. You're going to be there. And guess what I'm answering for when I'm there? I'm not answering for you. I'm not answering for what you did or did not do. I'm answering for me. And I'll never forget Jesus' words when he made a statement to one of the disciples and he was walking along with him. He said, well, Lord, what about him? He said, "If I will that he tarry till I come, what's that to you? You follow me. You, not him, you follow me. Forget about him. As it is written, saith the Lord, every knee shall bow to me. Every tongue shall confess to God." There's no room for exceptions in this. "So then every one of us shall give an account of himself to God," irrespective of clan, race, group, church, sect, sept. "Let us not therefore judge one another anymore." Let's judge this rather. And this is the singular evil of clannishness, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way. You know, if we could ever get our minds around this and come to realize that color, height, shortness, hair, lips, teeth, the lack thereof, whatever else it may be, all the things that we think make us different from other people, when the time comes to stand before God, our sect, our clan, our church, our denomination, none of that is going to account for anything. What will account is whether Christ is in us and whether our lives manifest in the way we live them, in the way we treat other people, in the way we care about one another, whether our lives manifest that Christ is in us and Christ is our clansman.